Hello, film students. This is Professor Adelman, and I want to say a few words about Easy Rider, which I notified you I would do after looking at your discussion board posts. So you've seen the film, and you've seen the documentary or excerpts from the documentary that places Easy Rider in a historical context, which basically is that as the film studios found themselves with the kind of film that they had been making, commercial films, epic films, very formulaic films, with the movements for social justice, for anti-war movements, with all of what has been called social unrest of the 60s, and the involvement of young people in those movements. Studios found that young people were not attracted to their films, and it took the clear vision of some of younger producers who were affiliated with big film studios to start looking for other ways to tell stories and to give the people involved in creating films more freedom to come up with certain kinds of stories and to tell them in ways that did not fit the conventions of what we've been calling in this class Hollywood film or first cinema. So I'll remind you that those 5 characteristics of commercial films, Hollywood films, first cinema, all those terms apply, are unity, clarity, which basically means that in unity all of the plots and subplots and the scenes and every moment of the film works together to create the whole. Clarity, as a viewer, you should not be really confused about what's going on at any point. And then the kinds of characters that these Hollywood narratives follow will be people we can identify with, and they're goal-oriented. They have to overcome some kind of obstacle or series of obstacles and undergo a transformation by the time the film is over. So even in the case of the films we've seen so far, say Grapes of Wrath, you can see that Tom Joad, right at the beginning, we know that even though he's been jailed for homicide, it was in self-defense. And he's also played by the handsome face of a Hollywood star, so we know that there's something redeemable about him. Same thing can be said for Marlon Brando playing Terry Malloy, that we know right from the beginning that this is a redeemable character, and we're going to want to accompany him on his journey through these obstacles to achieve his goal. And then another characteristic, the 4th, so we've had unity, clarity, certain kinds of character development, closure, which means that everything wraps up, and often that kind of closure will be through romantic union, which is certainly the case in On the Waterfront. And then the 5th is unobtrusive craftsmanship, and that is the continuity editing. So when you look at Easy Rider, you can see that it's really clear that every single one of these 5 characteristics somehow do not apply to the story that we watch. And that's deliberate, that's representative of the creative freedom that directors and writers fought for in the 60s. And because there were people who were leading studios like Bert Schneider who could see that this was the way to go, Hollywood was transformed and ultimately, as that film says, managed to save itself since it continues to the present. I want to say a couple other things about Easy Rider. One is, for me, I think there is a really important aspect to it, that because it was filmed on location and on the road, there's a certain kind of documentary quality to it, in the sense that it really preserves some scenes from an America that existed in the 1960s and does not exist anymore. You really will not find towns with roads through them and diners and main streets and restaurants as much because of the development of interstates. So we're seeing something very different from what you guys have grown up with. And in that sense, the film, by shooting a good part of it on location, does preserve some scenes and some moments of this country that otherwise don't exist anymore. So that's one thing. A couple of other things. This is in looking at your responses on the discussion board that I want to point out that the character of George is really important in this film. When you look at reviews of the film, you can see this idea that really the film and even the filmmakers didn't know what to do with it. And then George comes along, and he has much more of a social political awareness than the other two characters. And that is when the film starts to come together in terms of perhaps a message, the idea of showing the U.S. that America, that Wyatt and Billy are going through as one that is violent and intolerant and cannot accept many of its own people. So George really becomes a kind of vocalization of the idea that the film ultimately conveys. But many of you were surprised by the ending, as I think everybody who watches this film is. It comes out of the blue. It's not expected. It really violates that idea of closure for sure, and seems random. And it is random. It actually happens by accident, whereas George's murder has been deliberate. So that's something also to think about. And then some of you mentioned motif. The American flag is all over this film as a motif being anything in a film that is repeated often enough so as to impart meaning. So that is a really important one, as is the motorcycle itself, which is that symbol of restless youth and the road, getting on the road. So many things to talk about in this film. I'm going to stop now and may post another video with some more thoughts, but for now, this is already 6 minutes, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to it. Hopefully it helps pull some of my comments on your posts together and gives you some more things to think about in terms of Easy Rider. Not everybody thinks Easy Rider is a great film. I think it's a really important film historically, and I think it really is one that is a serious moment in American film history. And while made within a studio, nonetheless does not follow the typical structure. The other term I want you guys to be able to keep in mind is the episodic structure, which is different from the three-part traditional plot. In an episodic structure, which you also see in Do the Right Thing, scenes happen one after another, but they do not have a kind of cause and effect connection to them the way a more tightly knit three-part or four-part screenplay structure would have. All right, I will be in touch again. Hope this is helpful to you in terms of understanding Easy Rider.